Dubrow Suspicion Files.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a file from 1989 Fukushima, but we are not talking about nuclear reactors.
No, not this time.
We were talking about human anatomy, engineering limitations, and a crime that, frankly, appears to defy the fundamental laws of physics.
It really does.
We're investigating what has become known globally as the Fukushima septic tank mystery. The official case file is numbered 1989 F224.
And our source material for this deep dive is a meticulous forensic equivocal death analysis. And what that means is it's a case where the cause of death is clear, but the manner of death accident or homicide is, well, it's deeply in question.
And what makes this such a persistent, frustrating enigma is just the enormous gulf between the official conclusion and the physical facts.
Right. The official police report asks you to believe in something that is, for all intents and purposes, impossible.
Absolutely. Let's just start there. The official story is as shocking as it is simple. 26-year-old 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐒𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐒𝐓, an average-sized, healthy adult male, voluntarily crawled headfirst into this cramped, excrement-filled sewage pipe.
Right. A pipe that's located beneath a teacher's dormitory toilet.
His motive, according to the police, voyeurism. The conclusion was that he got stuck in the U-bend and died of hypothermia and positional asphyxia.
And that is where the forensic paradox just completely unravels the narrative. Our mission today is to deconstruct this impossibility.
Yeah.
We have to forensically evaluate the probability of that voluntary accidental entry against what seems to be the overwhelming probability of a staged homicide.
Because the official story stands in direct contradiction to, everything. Fundamental principles of anthropometry.
Which is the measurement of the human body, yeah.
Fluid dynamics, even behavioral psychology. It just doesn't line up.
Not at all. The tension here is immediately apparent. You have a container, this rigid PVC pipe, and you have the content 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓's body.
And they simply do not geometrically match.
They don't. And that's the key question this entire investigation really hinges on, and it's maybe the most obvious one. How? How could an average-sized adult male navigate a space that was physically smaller than his own shoulders?
Especially when that space involved a sharp right-angle turn, filled with freezing excrement.
Exactly. If the police conclusion is true, then 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓 was capable of a kind of, geometric self-compression unknown to science.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's jump right into the biomechanics of the crime scene.
Let's do it.
We have to start with the hard numbers. The sources paint a pretty clear picture of 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓. He was, by all accounts, a young man of promise. He's 26 years old, about 170 centimeters tall, which translates to roughly, 5'7"?
About that, yeah. An average build.
He was employed by a subsidiary of the massive Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPI, and he was also really actively involved in local political campaigning, not some kind of social outcast.
No, not at all. An average, healthy young man. Now, compare those dimensions to the coffin he was found in. The specific conduit was a standard Japanese sanitary elbow pipe, likely a blend of reinforced PVC and concrete. Its internal diameter was only 36 centimeters.
36 centimeters. That's about 14 inches.
It's over a foot.
When I tried to visualize that, I'm thinking of maybe a large pizza box. It's not a space a person can fit into.
It really isn't. So what were 𝐏𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓's key dimensions that conflicted with that 36-centimeter aperture? The critical measurement is what's called the biacromial width.
It is.
It's the span across the shoulders, basically from the bony point of one shoulder to the other.
Okay.
Based on his height and build, forensic analysts estimated 𝐏𝐂𝐂𝐓's biacromial width to be between 40 and 43 centimeters.
Wait, hold on. Let me just repeat that for emphasis. His body was, at minimum, 4 centimeters wider than the pipe's internal diameter.
Correct. That's about 1.5 inches wider at a minimum.
It's like trying to put a square peg into a round hole that is simply too small.
Precisely. The width of the victim's body exceeded the aperture diameter. This is the central physical contradiction of the entire official narrative.
So it's impossible from the start.
From the very start. To even attempt to pass through a 36-centimeter opening, 𝐏𝐂𝐂𝐓 would have required extreme clavicular compression.
Which means what, exactly?
It means forcibly pushing the clavicle and scapula together. You'd essentially have to dislocate or even break your own shoulder girdle. And you'd have to do that while holding a very specialized body posture.
You mentioned the diver's posture in the source material.
Yes. To minimize your effective shoulder width, you have to raise your arms strictly above your head, trying to make your upper torso as narrow as possible.
That's a position that takes effort and coordination. Not something you do by accident.
Not at all. And even with maximum effort, getting a rigid, living body that's 40-plus centimeters wide into a 36-centimeter hole suggests a level of force that is just, well, it's incompatible with voluntary entry.
Okay, now let's add the second, even more complex physical constraint. This wasn't a straight vertical drop.
No. And this is the truly devastating piece of physics that just makes the official story a complete fairy tale.
The L-bend.
The L-bend. The sewage system used a U-bend or an S-trap, that sharp, nearly 90-degree right-angle turn.
Which is standard in plumbing, right? To block sewer gases.
Exactly. It maintains a water seal to keep the gases from rising into the dormitory. But that bend is what makes voluntary passage physically impossible, even if he somehow could compress his shoulders.
Why specifically?
Because the human torso is relatively rigid. The analysis estimates Kano's torso length from his sternum down to his pelvis to be about 50 centimeters.
Right.
Now imagine trying to force a stiff 50-centimeter-long piece of lumber through a sharp 90-degree L-bend that has an internal diameter of only 36 centimeters.
You can't bend the lumber.
You can't bend a rigid object around a tight corner that is smaller than the object's own length. You would need to literally pivot the middle of the torso, which is protected by your spine and your rib cage.
It would have to break.
Correct. For a rigid 50-centimeter length to navigate that bend in that pipe, it requires an external force far, far exceeding human capability. Or it requires structural failure.
So either the pipe bursts or Kano's bones break.
Yes. And neither of those outcomes was reported in the official police findings. No broken bones consistent with that kind of force. No damage to the pipe.
The conclusion seems inescapable then. The force required had to be delivered externally.
It had to be.
So the police narrative requires him to be, what, a shape-shifting compressed liquid when he goes in, and then a hyper-flexible snake to get around the corner, all while suffering from freezing cold and suffocating pressure. It just doesn't track.
Not even a little, and that leads us directly to what the source analysis calls the most telling inconsistency against the voluntary entry theory.
The clothing paradox.
The clothing paradox.
Yeah.
This detail is, it's just so compelling for the staging theory.
Okay, so the body was found shirtless.
Shirtless, yes. But his upper garments, a jacket or a sweater, were found balled up and pressed against his chest, deep inside the pipe with him.
Okay, so this creates an impossible forensic dilemma, right? There are only two possibilities.
Exactly. 2 cases, and both of them refute the police conclusion.
Let's start with 𝐏𝐂𝐃 Canner removed his clothes outside the pipe.
Right, so if he took them off outside, why on earth would he then take these heavy garments, probably soaked with cold groundwater or sewage, and shove them into the pipe ahead of him?
To press them against his chest, it makes no sense.
None. A voyeur focuses on quiet, quick infiltration. You're not going to carry useless, bulky, excrement-soaked clothing into a confined space. Logically, he would have left them neatly folded beside the manhole for when he got out.
So that theory fails the logic test immediately. Let's look at case B then. He removed his sweater and jacket inside the 36-centimeter pipe.
And this is where the biomechanics just proved the staging. The source analysis is very clear on this. To remove a sweater, you need elbow extension, you need complex leverage, you have to pull your arms back over your head.
Things you can't do when your elbows are pinned to your sides.
You physically cannot. In a 36-centimeter tube, you can't extend your elbows outward. They would immediately jam against the pipe walls. There is no physical room to maneuver. It's biomechanically impossible.
So if he couldn't have taken them off outside and brought them in, and he couldn't have taken them off inside, how did the body end up shirtless with the clothes bunched up against his chest?
The only scenario that logically resolves the clothing paradox is forced insertion.
Okay, walk me through that.
As the perpetrators applied a massive external force to shove the rigid body through that narrow, rough pipe and past the L-bend, the friction between the pipe walls and the fabric of his sweater
Would have just stripped it right off of him.
forcibly stripped the garments off his torso. They would then naturally bunch up and compress against the widest point of his chest.
And maybe even serve as kind of padding.
Exactly. A buffer between whatever they were using to push him, likely a long rod or a pole, and the victim's body itself.
So it's the pipe itself that's performing an involuntary stripping. The placement of those clothes is, in effect, a physical fingerprint of the crime.
It is the evidence of friction and force, not voluntary action. It tells a story of violence.
Okay, so moving beyond the pure geometry, which is already damning, let's explore the environment Kano was in and the behavioral contradictions that are inherent in this voyeurism theory.
Right.
The pipe, as we established, contained a highly viscous sludge mixture, excrement, toilet paper waste, and other sewage.
This is where fluid dynamics become absolutely crucial. We're not dealing with free-flowing water here.
No.
We're dealing with what's called a non-Newtonian fluid. Think of it less like water and more like trying to run through wet concrete or sinking into quicksand.
Can you explain the effect that viscosity would have on his movement, assuming he could even move?
Well, this non-Newtonian sludge creates exponential resistance or drag against any attempt at sustained movement. If 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓 was trying to crawl up or even just breathe while he was suspended in it, the effort would have been immense, utterly unsustainable.
And once he was wedged in?
Once his 40-centimeter shoulders engaged that 36-centimeter aperture, he would become what the report calls a biological plug.
A biological plug. And that creates suction, right? Which would trap him even more.
Exactly. As the body moves forward, it displaces that dense sludge, and it creates a powerful vacuum behind it. This suction makes retreat virtually impossible once you're wedged in.
And on top of all that, it's freezing cold.
Brutally cold. This is late February in Fukushima. The medium he was in was likely at or even below freezing. That guarantees immediate and devastating hypothermic shock.
So navigating this environment voluntarily, knowing the risk, for zero gain.
It's nonsensical. Which brings us back to the supposed motive, voyeurism. The official story claims he was found facing upward toward the toilet bowl to peep.
Yeah, and this theory just fails the most fundamental test of behavioral logic.
Completely. Genuine voyeurism, or skeptophilia, is driven entirely by visual gratification. The whole point is to see something.
But he couldn't have seen anything.
The entire endeavor is rendered pointless, zero risk to reward. Because the U-bend, the very structural element that trapped him, functions by holding a permanent water seal.
A perpetually murky, dark pool of water blocking any line of sight.
Precisely. It's opaque. You cannot see through the standing sewage water of a U-bend up into the toilet bowl above. It's impossible. The position he was found in, wedged against the ceiling of that U-bend, was the maximum risk position for zero visual gain.
Voyeurs, as the analysis points out, prioritize safety and escape routes.
Always. Yet 𝐏𝐻𝐃 allegedly chose a self-lethal trap with an impossible visual target. The behavior just does not align with the alleged motivation, not even close.
And that leads us to what the report calls the acoustic damping anomaly, the silence. The dormitory was a typical wood frame building, poorly soundproofed. A man stuck in agony inside a PVC pipe directly beneath the floorboards. Someone would have heard him.
Easily. The PVC pipe itself would act like a giant stethoscope, amplifying any sounds from inside.
And he would have been making noise.
You'd have to assume so. 𝐏𝐻𝐃 would have been subjected to agonizing hypothermic shock, compounded by positional asphyxia, the compression of his chest preventing his diaphragm from fully expanding. Every breath would be a struggle. Survival instinct dictates screaming, thrashing, vocalizing that agony.
But the police theory relies on 𝐏𝐻𝐃 maintaining voluntary silence to avoid detection by Mrs. A, the teacher who used the toilet.
Which is utterly inconsistent with the physical agony of impending death and the biological imperative to survive. It's absurd.
So what does the silence point to?
The acoustic silence reported points strongly toward incapacitation. The only way he doesn't scream is if he physically couldn't.
Meaning he was already unconscious?
Or dead upon insertion, maybe due to a stun blow, or perhaps he was mechanically gagged. That lack of noise is a powerful forensic indicator of external force and premeditation.
There's one more crucial environmental detail. It relates to Mrs. A's use of the toilet before the discovery.
Yes.
She only reported a sluggish flush before the body was found, not a complete blockage at first.
And that sluggish flush is a critical timing marker. It's huge. If 𝐏𝐻𝐃 had entered that pipe immediately on the 24th, when he disappeared, the blockage would have been instant and catastrophic.
The toilet would have backed up immediately, overflowed.
Right. The fact that Mrs. A continued using the toilet for several days, only noticing the flow becoming poor or sluggish later, suggests one of two things.
Okay.
Either the body was positioned in a very specific way that allowed some partial fluid bypass, which seems unlikely, or, more critically, the body was placed there after Mrs. A's last significant usage.
So likely late on the 26th or early on the 27th.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That slight delay in the total blockage strongly suggests a staging operation that occurred a significant amount of time after he first vanished.
It provides a strong physical constraint on the time of insertion. It forces the police's estimated time of death, which was February 26th, to align with the time of dumping, not the time he first arrived at the dormitory.
Correct. It completely changes the narrative.
We have established the physical impossibility of the entry and the behavioral absurdity of the motive. So now let's focus on the investigative inconsistencies, the crucial red flags that strongly point toward a highly organized, premeditated staging of a murder.
And the missing gap in the timeline is the most glaring place to start.
It really is. So let's just lay it out.
Okay.
𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓 was last seen driving his vehicle on the morning of Friday, February 24th.
Right. Mrs. A, the teacher, was using the toilet in the dormitory between the 24th and the 27th.
The body was only discovered on the night of February 28th, and the police estimated the time of death as February 26th.
So if he disappeared on the 24th and died on the 26th, he was alive and missing for approximately 48 hours.
A full 2 days.
That 48-hour window is the smoking gun of the entire kidnapping and murder scenario. If he had voluntarily entered the pipe immediately on the 24th, he would have been stuck, freezing and agonizing for 2 days. And as we said, the catastrophic blockage would have occurred instantly, alerting Mrs. A.
It's the only thing that makes sense.
The only logical conclusion that aligns the estimated time of death with the reported blockage is that 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓 was held captive, killed, and kept cold or refrigerated elsewhere for those 48 hours.
And then his body was dumped into the septic system as a means of calculated disposal.
Yes. That explains the silence, and it explains the delayed flush. It transitions this from some bizarre, tragic accident to a clear case of illegal detention and homicide.
Absolutely. The staging required time and concealment.
It did.
Now let's discuss the car and the keys. It's such a mundane detail, but it speaks volumes about 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓's immediate intentions just before he vanished.
It really does. 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓's car was found parked near the dormitory, and crucially, the keys were left in the ignition.
Keys in the ignition.
Think about the risk assessment of a supposed voyeur who is planning this complex, time-consuming, and utterly filthy infiltration into a sewage system.
Your first priority is your escape route.
Exactly. You would prioritize your escape, you'd lock your car, you would conceal your presence. Leaving the keys in the ignition suggests he was expecting to return to the car in minutes, maybe seconds.
It implies an intent to return immediately.
It aligns perfectly with the homicide scenario. 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓 was lured or intercepted under some false pretext. Maybe he was expecting a quick, confidential conversation. Hey, can you step over here for a second?
And was ambushed and incapacitated right there beside his vehicle.
It suggests the complete absence of the kind of careful planning that the police's voyeurism theory requires.
So while the keys suggest how he might have been ambushed, the shoes are arguably the strongest piece of physical evidence against the police narrative.
I agree. The source analysis calls it the staging error or the smoking gun.
Yep.
The shoe anomaly is, I think, irrefutable evidence of a staged crime.
Okay, lay it out.
So one shoe was found outside, near the manhole entrance. This suggests maybe a brief struggle or it was taken off before entry. But the other shoe was found inside the pipe, lodged near 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓's head.
Near his head. This is the part that defies any logical voluntary action.
Completely.
If he crawled up the pipe head first, his feet, and therefore his remaining shoe, should be at the absolute bottom of the pipe, near the tank opening. Or pull off his foot somewhere down below his waist.
Gravity exists.
How did the shoe travel upward to rest by his head?
There is no physical mechanism in the voluntary entry theory that explains the shoe's placement. The forces of gravity and drag would pull it down, not carry it up past his torso against the flow.
So what does the analysis say?
It confirms the forced staging theory. After 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓's body was shoved into the pipe, the perpetrators, in their haste to remove all trace evidence, noticed the remaining shoe lying near the manhole.
So they just tossed it in after him.
They tossed it into the tank after him to dispose of it. The shoe then entered the tank, and the subsequent hydraulic flow, or maybe the movement caused by the final shove of the body, carried that light second shoe upward, past his torso, and it lodged near his head.
Which was the highest point of the U-bend where the body was fully constrained.
Exactly. So the killer's attempt to clean up their mess inadvertently created the most geometrically impossible piece of evidence. They tried to hide the shoe, and in doing so, they proved they put the body there.
It's a textbook staging error. It confirms external manipulation.
Absolutely. And finally, let's address the physical evidence on 𝐏𝐂𝐃𝐂𝐓 himself. The reports noted minor head trauma.
Right. And the official explanation, of course, was that this was just from contact with the pipe during his awkward voluntary entry.
And while that's superficially plausible, the forensic analysis points out that the minor trauma is equally, if not more, consistent with a stun blow.
A stun blow?
A quick, blunt, concussive strike used to incapacitate a victim. If 𝐏𝐻𝐃𝐂𝐀𝐒𝐓 was ambushed, a strike to the head would render him unconscious, pliable, and critically, silent.
And as we discussed, silence is absolutely necessary for this crime to be successfully concealed beneath the dormitory where Mrs. A was actively living.
Precisely. An unconscious victim is a rigid body that is far easier to compress and manipulate into the impossible geometry of that pipe, especially if the perpetrators were using leverage and force. It makes the impossible insertion physically manageable, and it explains the lack of struggle or noise.
So if the evidence points so overwhelmingly to homicide, we have to pivot to the question of motive. And perhaps more importantly, why were the police so quick to classify this as a tragic, shameful accident?
Right. And the source material suggests a very powerful political and cultural context that served as a deliberate forensic shield.
A forensic shield.
We have to place ourselves in 1989 Japan. The social climate was fraught with fear. This was the year of the arrest of the serial killer Totomu Miyazaki.
Right, which triggered what became known as the otaku panic.
Exactly. A widespread moral hysteria centered on the perceived threat of hidden sexual deviance and antisocial behavior in society.
So the police were essentially handed a ready-made cultural script for this. By labeling Kano a voyeur, this story wrote itself, a pervert who died pursuing his own moral corruption.
Yes, and the police classification suffered severely from what we call theory-induced blindness. They chose the easiest, most culturally resonant narrative first, and then they ignored or just forced all the contradictory evidence, the geometry, the shoes, the clothes, to fit that narrative.
And that label, voyeur, acted as this forensic shield. How did that shield function in practice?
It served two primary functions. First, it isolated the tragedy. It made it Kano's individual moral failure, not a systemic failure of local security or a failure of the police investigation.
So it absolved the authorities of having to investigate a complex homicide.
Right. It saved them the monumental cost, time, and political embarrassment of an investigation that might involve powerful local figures. And second, and perhaps more cynically, it made Kano unworthy of a proper investigation. It convinced the community that he brought his fate upon himself, and that stifled any public outcry for justice.
So the stigma of deviance was basically weaponized to close a complex murder case. But let's look at who benefits from Kano's permanent silence. The analysis gives us two powerful, interwoven motives. Let's start with the local political turmoil.
The political motive is intense. Kano was a key, vocal, and active campaigner for the incumbent mayor in a very fierce local election.
And rural Japanese elections in this era, especially during the height of the economic bubble, were often defined by what is known as money power politics, or kinkinseiji.
Kinkinseiji. And in a village context, that means that local politics revolved entirely around the allocation of lucrative public works contracts.
Infrastructure projects, road construction, waste management.
The financial lifeblood of the town. If Kano, as a key campaigner, stumbled upon evidence of bid rigging, corruption, or illegal financial exchanges connected to the massive contracts at stake in that mayoral race,
he would immediately become a profound liability.
a liability to the opposing faction, or even to his own side if he was perceived as a potential whistleblower who might upset the whole system.
So his death wasn't personal. It was financially or politically expedient. And the manner of disposal, that reinforces that interpretation.
Absolutely. The decision to dump a human body in a septic tank is highly symbolic. It's not just disposal. It is an intentional act of profound humiliation.
It's designed to send a message.
A powerful, unmistakable message of filth, waste, and silence. This method is entirely consistent with the kind of intimidation culture you see in rural political rivalries or organized crime, aiming to eliminate a threat and ensure nobody asks questions.
The message is, you will be buried in shame, unworthy of a clean burial, unworthy of memory.
Exactly.
That makes the political motive terrifyingly calculated. Now, let's look at the second major motive, the TEPCO connection. Kano worked for a TEPCO maintenance subsidiary.
And this brings us to the immense power of what's called the nuclear village. In 1989, Japan was still reeling slightly from the global fallout of the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. The nuclear establishment, led by powerful entities like TEPCO, was fiercely defensive and protective of its image and its operational security. And Fukushima was a major hub for this industry.
So if a TEPCO worker died, especially one involved in maintenance monitoring, a murder investigation would bring a lot of unwanted scrutiny.
A huge amount. The analysis suggests the high possibility of Kano being a whistleblower. If he had discovered significant, dangerous safety violations, maintenance fraud, or evidence of corruption within TEPCO's subsidiaries.
information that could destabilize public trust in the nuclear program.
He would be perceived as a catastrophic liability. His death needed to be immediately dismissed as an accident to avoid the intense public and media focus that the clear murder of a TEPCO employee would trigger.
And the septic tank death provided the perfect, sordid, and easily dismissed cover story.
It's the intersection of local political corruption and massive corporate power, both of whom required instant silence. The accident served both masters perfectly.
It was the lowest effort, highest impact cover-up possible under the cultural circumstances of 1989.
It was.
Okay, let's bring this all together into the single most probable sequence of events. Scenario B, the forensic reconstruction of the homicide. This is the script that connects all the evidence we've discussed.
Right. Scenario B is the only hypothesis that reconciles the physical anomalies, the timeline gap, and the behavioral contradictions. Kano is lured from his car, expecting a brief, confidential talk.
Hence the keys left in the ignition.
He's ambushed quickly, likely incapacitated with a stun blow to the head, making him pliable and ensuring immediate silence.
He is then held captive or killed and kept cold for approximately 48 hours. This explains the silence, the lack of an immediate blockage, and it aligns with the police's estimated time of death of February 26th.
On the 26th or 27th, the perpetrators transport the body back to the manhole. They strip his shirt off to reduce the friction needed for the insertion. They open the manhole and use extreme external force.
A long rod or a pole, maybe?
Very likely. Possibly using the bunched-up sweater as a buffer to shove the rigid, unconscious body deep into the U-bend of that 36-centimeter pipe. The geometry ensures Kano is fully constrained and concealed.
The body is now a biological plug, but the crime isn't completely staged yet.
No. In the final hasty act of concealment, the perpetrator notices the loose shoe left behind at the entrance during the struggle. They toss it into the tank to eliminate that last piece of trace evidence.
And 𝐏𝐻𝐃 dies from positional asphyxia and hypothermia inside the pipe. A death perfectly masked by the police and media as the grotesque, accidental failure of a perverted act.
It's chilling how calculated the disposal was, only ruined by the physics of the human body and that one misplaced shoe.
The convergence of all these anomalies, the impossible geometry, the clothing paradox, the silent timeline, and the shoe by the head, it just makes the official story scientifically and logically untenable.
And this is what the analysis ultimately concludes. The official narrative is a masterpiece of motivated police classification. It is not forensic science.
So to summarize this deeply disturbing deep dive, the geometric constraints, the 36-centimeter pipe versus the 40-plus centimeter shoulders, the impossibility of removing clothing inside, and the specific bizarre placement of that shoe, they definitively reject the voluntary accident theory.
This case stands as a stark, tragic example of how the safety myth policing that was so prevalent in 1980s Japan operated. The institutional pressure to maintain low crime statistics and protect powerful entities like TEPCO meant classifying a difficult, politically sensitive homicide as a simple, shameful accident.
And the most profound implication we draw from the source material is the function of social stigma. By labeling Kano a pervert, the police created a narrative mechanism that effectively made him unworthy of a proper investigation.
They used public shame as a silencing tool, ensuring the village didn't seek justice for what was likely a political or corporate assassination.
It's the moment where a convenient sociological obstruction, the easy answer, was allowed to completely override undeniable physical evidence. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, as you reflect on this investigation. The data highlights a terrifying reality. Structures like septic tanks, utility tunnels, and other common infrastructure that we interact with and ignore every single day. They create blind spots in the landscape.
These are places where people can vanish literally feet from others because we all operate under the assumption that nothing nefarious happens just beneath the ordinary veneer of our routine, visible environment. They are perfect places for concealment.
The source analysis suggests that if this case were reopened today, the investigators shouldn't look for complex motives in dark corners, but rather focus forensically on simple logistics.
They need to find those holding sites, warehouses, construction offices, refrigerated spaces near the dormitory, to connect the dots between that 48-hour timeline gap and the powerful political or corporate forces involved in those mayoral contracts and TEPCO's maintenance programs.
It is a sobering thought.
Yeah.
How easily something so mundane as a domestic septic system can be repurposed for the most calculated act of political concealment.
And what other blind spots exist in the infrastructure you pass every day? That's the question this case really forces us to ask.